Alrighty, it's that time of the season again. I'm going to be doing my early leader tier list for the Legends of the Force set. Going to break down all 18 new leaders, give them ranks, talk about all their pros and cons. So let's get to it. But before we do, please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Click like. It helps out the video a ton. And if you're interested in some more content from me, do check out my Patreon as well. All right. So the goals of this, primarily, it's to have some fun and to get you as much information about these new leaders as I can. What we can do with them, how good will they be, how interesting are they. My tier list is a little different than some others. I don't just rank them based on like what I think will be like A to Z, best to worst. There's a combination here, of course, that includes power level, but also like the power floor and power ceiling. So it varies a little bit because some leaders, I think it's very unlikely they'll be bad, but also there's a good chance they won't be like top tier, while others can very like most likely will be bad but have this like off chance to really surprise and spike. So I like to combine that into my rankings as well as my own personal interest level in them. Some leaders I find kind of boring to build around. That will certainly affect their rank here. I don't go the traditional letter rankings, S, A, B, C, D, F, or whatever else it may be. I name them, and you'll see that in a moment. Mostly just to have some fun. In the end, a lot of this doesn't mean so much. The important part of this video is the conversation I'm going to have about these leaders and the ideas that I'm trying to present here. I also like to speak a little bit about how they may fit into the current meta, which of course is not likely to be the exact same in the next set or with the release of Legends of the Force, but a lot of good stuff from the previous sets will likely still carry over into the existing meta. All right, let's get started. So my first tier, it's the bottom tier. This is called tier no. And there's not much good spin on this tier. I think these leaders are pretty bad, in all honesty, kind of uninteresting. But let's discuss them a little bit anyway. So Rey, I actually almost made a separate tier just for Rey because of how bad I think this leader is and how unfortunate, because this artwork is actually incredible. This is probably my favorite artwork of any of the new leaders, but this leader is abysmal. You got this front side action. It's being able to deal a damage without spending a resource or a force trigger is like decent, but the clause for it is quite difficult. Non-unit force card. Go into the database. Search by force trait for non-units. You'll find very few good cards. Like there's force throw, obviously, but there's a lot of chaff mixed in there. And you're talking about having to build a deck around this like non-unit mechanic. I mean, even like I can't even think about how you're gonna fill a deck with like even like 10 of these cards and still consider yourself to have a good deck. But this isn't even the bad part. This is the good part of the leader. The bad part is the actual unit. This is a 7 flip, which is incredibly late. It's a 6-8, which is fine. Like, I get it. The stats are okay at 7. But the deploy effect, when deployed, you may discard your hand if you do draw 2 cards. If this just said when deployed, draw 2 cards, it would still be really, really bad. This is worse, obviously, because you have to discard your hand first. I don't get this. There's no synergy between this side and the other side. At a 7 flip leader, you're really expecting some effect that can help stabilize. Look at the other 7 flip leaders, none of which have been particularly good and constructed, but like Yoda flips and kills kind of anything, right? That's pretty big. Chewbacca, giant sentinel, or like Lando, also giant sentinel. Mace Windu in this same color deals 2 to everything that's damaged, right? These are things that can potentially help stabilize. Rey, none of this. Does not help you at all when she flips for stability. And it's a 7 flip leader, which is already just way below the curve. The stats don't justify it. The leader ability does not justify this. This leader is just not it. And it's quite unfortunate. The other heroic leader on this list is Ahsoka Tano. And this one also is just not interesting to me. This is another one of those blue heroic, we have Sentinel or do something with Sentinel leaders. It might actually do it worse than all the other versions I already mentioned, Chewbacca and Lando. You have to use the Force to get Sentinel, which now means you have to build your deck around this Force mechanic, and there's just way better payoffs than Sentinel in this mechanic. And then her leader, 6 flip, 5/6, and does not even have Sentinel when she flips. She's just a 5/6 vanilla when she flips. She has to actually attack first to give something Sentinel. Good luck. She's probably going to be dead before she attacks. As a 6 health, 6 flip leader, we know that is not an adequate stat line. We've seen Maul have 6 health. We've seen Grand Inquisitor. Rey has been the only 6 health, 6 flip leader to ever see any sort of play because of her stat line. And, she grows the moment she attacks. Restore 3 is massive. And her ability and the way you build decks around that Rey has led to being able to flip into secured board states, usually with tiny sentinels blocking the way or a lot of action churning before you flip. But this Ahsoka flips, she's just gonna die. The Force mechanic on this leader is not very powerful to just give Sentinel temporarily, using up that token while you're at it. Not exciting for me at all in terms of build around prospects, not particularly powerful, so belongs in tier no. Now we're going to get into the couple villains here. We've got Morgan Elsbeth, and this is one where the floor is probably actually not so bad, just because you've got a 5 flip leader in green villain that's a 3/6, so the stats are okay. You're in that magic 5 flip, which means you're talking resupply super laser tech into overwhelming barrage on a leader, so that's already kind of raising the power floor a little bit. And the good here is that you're getting resource cheating built into your leader. The problem is that the resource cheating is one of the most clunky resource cheating mechanics we have seen. And just because you're resource cheating does not make the leader good, right? We've seen Dooku as a leader that has a very narrow resource cheating interaction. He did not quite become meta. And Morgan's even more situational. It's not very easy right now to build a deck where every unit has the same keyword, right? That's practically impossible, which means you're going to have to pick and choose with the keyword synergies that you're going to build with Elspeth. And at that point, you're going to enter into game situations where you're drawing the wrong half of your deck, right? You're drawing your Sentinel and an ambush, but not 2 of either. And all of a sudden her ability does nothing, right? And I expect this to happen a lot. And not only that, the fact that the unit needs to attack first, B, survive, and C, then not get killed before you do the ability, right? The unit still needs to be in play because you have to choose a friendly unit that attacked. You can't choose a friendly unit that's in your discard pile. So it's just a lot. It's a weird sequencing, right? Attack, not die. Your opponent then decides not to kill it. And then all that work. You still need to have the card in your hand that matches the keyword of the card in play. It's incredibly clunky. And I think the biggest kicker here is the fact that Elspeth herself does not have a keyword. I very much would have appreciated a keyword on this leader. I don't care which one. It could have been the worst keyword for her. Whatever. Overwhelm, Saboteur, Sentinel would obviously been very powerful. Ambush. She could have had Ambush, which would be hilarious on a leader because it wouldn't do anything. But yeah, something, because now when your opponents kill your units and you flip Elspeth, her ability does absolutely nothing. And I would have liked to at least be able to build around my leader's keyword for this mechanic. Overall, it's resource cheating, which is good, but the rest of the package, not so good. I think this will be incredibly clunky to work around. And the last one is Ground Inquisitor on this tier. This one's weird because, once again, I think the power floor will probably be fine. It's a 5 flip leader that flips into a 3/5 shielded unit, which is okay. Of course, 5 health is not great on a 5 deploy, but with that shielded, it's generally going to be able to do something. But the Force mechanic here, similar to Ahsoka's above, very weak to just use that token to give -2/-0. You compare that to something like Mother Talzin that gives -1/-1. wildly different, wildly better. His ability is kind of funny on his unit side as well because he's shielded. So him attacking a defender to give it -2, -0 doesn't really matter if the thing he's shrinking has 3 or more power because he's still losing his shield on that attack. There's anti-synergy on the unit, right? The only way he gets to keep his shield is if he's attacking something that has 2 or less power, and then yes, he gets to keep his shield. He is a 5-foot force unit. That's cool. You could put force throw in your yellow-red deck if you would like, but the rest of the package here is really strange because Cunning Villainy is almost always going to have to be built towards an aggressive slanted build. There's not a lot of mid-rangey or control build-arounds in this color, but his leader ability is entirely board-centric control with that shrinking ability. It's anti-synergy with his own leader, who is a pretty weak statted individual. So I'm not really sure what to do with him. Like, the build around stuff here is strange. Of course, if you're going to do the force mechanics similar to Ahsoka, you kind of have to build around it. Villain in general does not have a lot of good early force units. This is a conversation I'm going to have in much more detail later when I speak about Mother Talzin, but the mechanic is not that supported, in all honesty, on the villain side compared to the hero side. So yeah, Grand Inquisitor doesn't look that exciting to me. All right, and here we have my second tier. This is tier unlikely, and this is going to be a pretty large one. So I actually split it between villains and heroes just so I could fit these all nice images in one place. So let's go through the 4 villain unlikely candidates. We've got Darth Maul, the starter set leader. He's not like bad. Like, his force ability to deal 1 damage to 2 different units is actually decent. But as alluded to with the Grand Inquisitor, the force mechanic is a little difficult to completely build around in villain. They're just, the unit density of good force units is not very high. But the real problem with him is the flip. And I mentioned it with Ahsoka. 6 health on a 6 deploy is just not it. I don't understand why he has 6 health. Again, right? The other Maul also had 6 health. It's just a big problem. And he doesn't like do anything when he comes into play. He does have a decent on attack ability. I actually think the power floor on him isn't too low. Like, he'll probably be like fine-ish to build around. I just don't see how he could really become amazing with that stat line and the fact that he is force dependent in his synergies. But force, of course, is a type that will likely continue to get supported with good units. So maybe when more good units and this build around becomes even more solid, then he can improve. Although that 6 in his health pool is never going to improve, and it's always going to be a major liability. And then we have Supreme Leader Snoke, and the reason he's here is I actually just think he's incredibly boring. He might be better than these other leaders here, but this is just Tarkin again. And we see 1 cost to given experience kind of mixed around in various forms. You got Tarkin, you got hero versions of it with Rey and like the new Obi-Wan. He's just, it's in the same color as Tarkin too, which is just disappointing. He's fine. Like, 1 to given experience is about on rate. You have sort of control over it, and he flips. And, you know, the nice part about his flip is that he can attack and give himself the experience if he's the only 4 power unit in play, or not even the only 4 power. If you have 2 4 powers, you can pick himself. So he's fine. He grows into a 5/8, and that's decent. Like, this is an okay shell. It's just not particularly inspired. I don't think it like drastically shifts anything in terms of like how command would build, and like the way you would build Tarkin is very similar probably to the way you would build Snoke. You just have more freedom in the units that you're playing. 6 deploy, not my favorite deploy. I don't think this will somehow be better than like most other green command shells, but it's not going to be bad. It'll probably be fine. He's mostly here because I just think he's boring. Then Third Sister, who I think is interesting, but in First Pass, playing with this ability, like give a unit hidden, it just isn't that impressive, to be honest. In theory, it sounds nice. Like, you give a unit hidden, you can kind of guarantee it can attack next turn. But you don't really, unless you can like also maintain initiative, which is not always easy, especially in an aggressive deck that's trying to attack with a lot of its units. Those typically are the decks that don't have initiative going into the next turn. The cool thing about this ability is actually like later in the game, when you can do things like play a hidden big unit, just like one action, dump all your resources. Like, imagine you get to the point where you can just do like a hidden Devastator, deal 4 to your opponent, and then it's like, you're gonna do something about it, or you're gonna let me claim and attack you for 9 with this, right? That it gives this deck a little bit of like cool longevity mixed with your own other hidden units. You can get a couple hidden units, so kind of going into your next turn, so you can kind of guarantee at least one of them can attack. It's nice, but it's like kind of fringy. It ended up playing not as cleanly as I would like. A bigger problem, though, is actually the leader herself. 4 health on 5 deploy. Yes, she flips, and she's usually going to be able to attack once because she is hidden herself. But that's basically it. I mean, you can try to suit her up. It's usually what you need to do, because otherwise she's almost certainly going to die the next turn. She is also incredibly vulnerable to just removal the turn you flip her. But it's okay. Like, this leader is not bad. I think you can build a pretty aggressive red aggression deck. It will almost certainly need to be mixed with cunning, because that's like where all the other like aggressive slanted villain stuff is, including a lot of the other decent hidden units that can kind of go well with her ability, so that you can kind of get multiple hidden stuff into play in one turn. But she's okay. I just don't think this will be a better aggro deck than like the heroic versions, or maybe even compared to like some other aggro-y villain stuff like Kylo or Asajj. Like, she's in that range of power level most likely, and not in the range of power level of something like a Sabine aggro deck that heroes have seen. And the last one here is Darth Revan. And, you know, when you look at this ability and like read through all this stuff, the leader deploy being a 3/6, and it really makes me wonder why this didn't just have a color. I don't think it's so powerful as a leader ability or a unit that it deserved to not have a color. And it's a major liability. When you try to build Revan decks, no matter what color you're picking, you'll notice that your curve just isn't very powerful, because you have to play kind of chaff units to fill out your 2, 3, 4 drop slots. It's just the reality. We're not at the point where we have enough cards to play this mono-colored deck, especially when you're not adding in the power level of some really good mono-colored cards, right? Like, you don't get to play the double aspect cards, so you're already losing some equity there. His ability is fine. It kind of snowballs, but if the moment it stops for like even a moment, you just fall apart completely with this leader. It's good with ambush stuff, especially if they can survive, right? They grow. But yeah, you just need to like get ahead and stay ahead consistently, or it just all falls apart pretty quickly. His unit only having 3 power when he flips is also kind of like, he could have been a 4/6, I think, and it would have been fine. Like, there's not so much power baked into this leader that it deserved not having a color and aspect to work with. It's just not there, I don't think. I think it's just going to be a decent-ish mid-rangey tempo deck, but it's unlikely to make much waves, just because of how difficult it is to like fill an entire deck with quality cards. So next up, we go tier unlikely for the heroes. First up, Anakin Skywalker. And we just talked about Darth Revan, so only fitting that we talk about the other aspectless leader. This isn't very good. Frankly, once again, not really worth not having an aspect. Let's break it up into a few parts. First of all, not having an aspect so that you can play other aspect cards. That's like you're taking a downside and then your upside is we're trying to minimize that downside, right? Wouldn't we just rather play another aspect's cards rather than having to use the force to play another aspect's cards? Probably. I get it. You get to play villain cards. That's super fun. Overwhelming Barrage, that's like the number one thing we're trying to do. Guess who else can play Overwhelming Barrage? Any villain deck running Command. They can play Overwhelming Barrage too, and they don't need to do this stuff. What other events may we want to play, or non-units? I don't know. There's like the villain blue stuff, like Power of the Dark Side, No Glory. That's cool. Maybe the Force Lightning out of red. There's like cool things you can do. Certainly you can splash a bunch of these things, but you still need that force, and that's actually a major liability here for this leader, because you are in one aspect, which means try to build a good force curve. You can't. I looked for all the force units in a few colors, the colors that you can play with Anakin. Yeah, there's a few good ones. Blue probably the most supported. You get like Yaddle and Secretive Sage. Those are 2 turn 1 plays that are decent. But then if you want more turn 1 plays for this leader, you start to fall apart. You have to play poorly statted units. Same in the 3-drop slot. You get like Yoda and Ezra. But then all of a sudden you want to go deeper. You miss out. It's just difficult. It's difficult enough in 2 colors to build a good force curve. It's really bad when you're trying to do it with just 1 color. So now you're either going to play non-force units, at which point your leader ability might fall apart completely, or you're going to play bad rate units just to turn it on. And your reward, once again, is to play another color of cards when you could have just played a leader that has a color and played those cards innately. The biggest payoff for this leader is, in fact, the Anakin Legendary, because he is really, really good when you have a heroic and a villainous card in your discard pile. That is upside. That is certainly an upside here. I just don't think it's enough, right? I don't think being super psyched about the fact that you get to play Overwhelming Barrage in a hero deck is all that. Like, Overwhelming Barrage is a fantastic card. It's played right now in basically 1 deck, because there's only 1 deck that really utilizes it incredibly well, and that's like Kira. There are some other decks that can run it, sure, and Anakin can run it. And he can run Power of the Dark Side too, but guess what? Villain blue decks can do that. You don't need to be Anakin to run a villainous control deck. You can just be a villainous control deck without needing to jam your whole deck full of bad force units, and they will be a lot of bad force units if you want to play a single aspect force deck. He flips into an okay unit, 4/6. I really wish he didn't require to use the force on his ability. Also, it would have been nice if it was like an on attack that the next you can like play a non-villain, like something a little more upside, so that it wasn't just basically the exact same ability on his unit and his leader. Overall, he doesn't seem that impressive to me. I get it. Overwhelming Barrage is good. I get it. Anakin is good. The unit from the Legendary. Not much else is particularly interesting here. Kanan Jarrus. This guy's pretty cool. Like, this is your generic, like, theme build-around leader. He does it a bit better than, like, Hera does, right? He's a Spectre build-around, although he gets the added bonus of also being a creature build-around. His ability itself on the leader side, again, it's not that inspired. 1 cost, give a shield. We've seen it, right? On Luke, seen it on Lando. His is actually a little better when you get to use it, because it's not timing restricted like the other 2, and it's actually not even like restricted to, like not timing restricted at all, which means you can add multiple shields to the same unit. It can happen the next turn or the turn after that. It doesn't have to be restricted the way the other 2 leaders are. The problem is it's restricted in a different sense, right? It's restricted to the type of units you can give shields to. So if you go try to build around Kanan with specters or creatures, you will once again realize there probably isn't enough to make a particularly compelling deck. Yeah, they're like, Hera at least can play all the specters in all the colors, which helps a little bit in filling out the deck. Kanan can't. So you're gonna have to play non-specter, non-creatures. So his ability becomes a little fringier that way, which isn't great, right? I really wish you could play this guy in mono blue, because the most interesting card I think that you could run is Doom, the new double aspect blue card. But then you lose even more of the specters and most of the creatures, right? There's not very many creatures in double blue, so his ability becomes even weaker in that double blue shell. As a leader, he's a big chunky beef stick when he flips if you have the support, right? A 5/8 shielded, that's decent. I don't love that he can shrink once they kill your other creatures and specters. That's a little annoying sometimes, because he can't just keep them all alive forever. And I would have liked, I don't know, maybe that shield ability should have stayed with him or something, that he can still give creatures or specters shields. It's just very all in on him kind of just being the thing that crushes your opponent, similar to the Anakin leader from not the one that we just talked about, OG Anakin, except OG Anakin can sometimes hit for like 9, right? It's a big difference when that leader can just come out and like end the game. Kanan's never bigger than a 5/8, and often he's smaller than that. So he is a theme build around. Currently, I don't think it's supported enough. It might be in the future, but leaders like this have typically not been great, because you have to give up a lot of deck space and deck equity to subpar cards. All right, Kit Fisto is next, and this isn't terrible. In fact, his leader ability is quite strong. 1 cost to deal 2 to a unit if you've attacked with a Jedi. The nice part about this being Jedi and not Force is actually that there are Jedi space units, and a big weakness to all these Force decks is that they are entirely on the ground, because the Force mechanic only works with Force units, and there are no flying Force units outside of Leia, who can't even attack when she's in space. But that done with that tangent, his ability is decent. 1 cost to deal 2 is above rate. You still end up in situations where you have to like either play non-Jedis to get good rate units, or play some under rate cards. That could change in the future, but it's not quite there yet. And the biggest problem with the leader is the unit is a 1/6 Saboteur that gets buffed for other Jedis. You know, even if you flip into a board that has 2 other units, which is sometimes unrealistic in a lot of matchups, he's still just a 3/6, and he can shrink after that. So his unit is a big disappointment. Now, I think there is some compelling stuff to do with him. I just find it hard to believe that currently, while they are still in rotation, that he can be better than either Anakin or Han 2 when you are building around Force or whatever it is. I mean, it's still mostly building around Force, because all the Jedis, or almost all of them, are Force units. Anakin kind of free rolls this 2 damage with his ability, because he can just make his units attack for an extra 2. And Han 2, although it's not a direct comparison, just gets to cheat all these same units out earlier. So they are both red leaders that work pretty well with a Force build around, and I think mostly just do what Kit is trying to do better. They will rotate before Kit does, though, so there is, I think, some hope for this leader to improve when some of those other leaders rotate out. So a decent leader side ability that still forces you to play off curve. I don't love that part of it, right? If you want to use the ability, for instance, on turn 2, you can only play a 2-drop plus do his ability. So it is a little difficult sometimes. You notice that a lot of leaders that have these 1-cost abilities don't get played a ton, and the ones that do, I mean, it's like Rey is probably the biggest one, but there's a few others. Kind of build the entire deck around playing off curve and using that ability to kind of make their plays on rate or on curve. And Kit is a little more difficult to kind of make that happen with. And the last leader in tier unlikely hero side is Cal Kestis. You know, he's the 4th flip of the set, so he's aggressive in nature, but the stats are bad. 3/4, don't love it. 4 health in particular, it hasn't been very good on the 4 flip leaders. We've seen a few of them like Kylo and Asajj. It's just, they don't stick around very long. And his ability is also strange, right? Use the force token. So we want to use the force token, we need force units. And force units are not really aggro units for the most part. They're not like terrible rate, but building an aggro deck around force units doesn't seem too easy to me. And his ability is also just gives your opponent a lot of agency, right? They can choose what to exhaust. Of course, if there's only one readied unit, that's getting exhausted, but overall, there's still just like a lot of hoops to jump through for this ability. Using that force token, using an action, you have to generate that force token, right, with other units. There's just kind of no way that this can usurp Sabine as like a premier aggro deck. I don't think he only hits as hard as she does. He has less health. His ability is more about like being good in racing situations, which is nice. Like maybe that's an angle that can make him work into other aggro decks, is that if you can exhaust the unit every turn, you're going to win those races a little bit. But he's so fragile. The mechanic itself forces you into a build around force that I don't think is going to be very well supported by his aggressive nature. So overall, I just think he's lacking a lot and unlikely to make a splash. All right, we're up to tier maybe, and we've got 4 here. And the primary reason these 4 here is because I think they are actually pretty interesting. The power level kind of varies. I think there's going to be like high ceiling, high floor potential to a bunch of these. High ceiling, low floor. I think there's a good chance that a lot of these leaders can kind of falter because even though they have like these really crazy potentials, it's going to be difficult to get their synergies going. But let's start with Kylo Ren here, the villain blue guy that gets to rip up a bunch of upgrades from the discard pile and attach it to him on deploy. Let's start with the negative. 7 deploy is difficult in this game. It simply is. Now, he has a pretty decent immediate effect because he himself has Sentinel, and he can also rip up a bunch of upgrades, some of which might let him do something immediately. So, in a couple colors, primarily yellow and green. With yellow, you can get something like Snapshot Reflex. It's a very cheap upgrade. It costs 1, and it lets him attack immediately. So you get to deploy an attack. That gives you some immediate umph. If you can do things like attach a bunch of things to him that turn and attack base, for instance, and try to close the game out very quick, similar to how like an Anakin deck sometimes just tries to like attack, bravado attack. You try to just get the game over with immediately. Other option, probably the primary option for this leader is actually with green. You get the new upgrade, the mini barrage upgrade that gets to do +2/+2 and attack and deal damage to something. So he sort of deploys and then immediately lets you do like a removal based action, which is pretty nice and beefs him up so that that Sentinel really blocks aggression. Now, that's all fun and games. The problem is that 7 deploy means you have to wait quite a while to do this. And aggressive decks in this game are very efficient. You can start all the way at like Sabine, but there's also like the pilot aggression decks, headlined by Vader right now. There's things like Quinlan, who's an aggressive deck, Han 2. A lot of these decks can really get under this leader because of how late it takes to deploy. And it's not like you're getting to immediately do all this stuff for free, right? You have to actually pay for the upgrades when he comes in. So you sometimes use up your whole turn doing that. And you're very all in on this leader deploy, really kind of protecting you, solidifying the game for you. And if this guy becomes incredibly popular, you can see a bunch of tech for this, right? As low cost as something like a Spec Force Soldier can really just break up the Sentinel and you might just lose on the spot. More control-oriented decks can use things like Rival's Fall and Super Laser Blast to kind of undo all the damage. And, you know, I think where he will shine more is actually in these grindier games. Like, I think if you're playing Kylo Data Vault, for instance, into like a Kira Data Vault deck, you're going to have a pretty good time because you are getting a leader that is going to draw you multiple cards, essentially, right? He flips. You don't even have to flip him on 7. You can flip him way later and potentially draw 4, 5, 6 cards when you upgrade him and get some immediate value out of those upgrades. So that's going to give you a ton of value in these grindier mid-range battles or grindier control battles, but you're losing a lot of points against aggression because of the deploy. And then you're also kind of more all in on this leader than some other leader strategies really require, which can lead to counterplay from some of the cards that I had just mentioned previously. His leader ability is also really interesting. The filtering is very powerful, but similar to how Yoda operates, it's an ability that also often forces you to lose initiative, which is not always great, especially against aggro decks. So that's upside and downside. A really good upside from that ability, though, is the ability to turn on the Anakin Legendary that I've talked about. You can get heroic cards into your discard pile quite easily. In fact, you just play some heroic upgrades. You don't even have, you have to spend the action discarding a card. You're going to draw a card back by discarding a heroic upgrade. So you don't have to play like heroic units and then just go down a card. You do just get to stay at parity. And I think it's a pretty easy splash. You just need a few of them, and hopefully you can turn on that Anakin by turn 5. And he can be a pretty big buff in terms of early game stability. So I think Kylo is a really interesting leader that I'm worried just won't quite make the cut against aggressive decks, which will leave him in that pool of a lot of other leaders that are like cool and grindy and good in the late game, but kind of get pushed out of the meta by Sabine and other such aggro decks. Barriss Offee is another interesting leader to me, and let's start with the negative here is that the Force mechanic, and you're in villain yellow, which has basically no support for Force other than like the new Shin Hati card. It's basically a barren wasteland of Force units, and we're going to hear my full complaints about villain Force momentarily when we get to Talzin, like I said. But yeah, so that's the downside. Now, this leader doesn't need to be as all in on this Force mechanic, because the one discount on event, I don't think is something you're looking to do every turn. You're going to pick and choose ways to make use of that ability, create turns where you can do like a powerful event plus a unit as opposed to just playing one card. And I don't think this is something that you need to really rely on to do every turn. So that means you probably don't need to be all in on Force units. Another kind of weak part about this leader is, again, the deploy. It's a 6-cost 4/7. Not great. Just not a great stat line. You don't get a better ability when she comes into play. You still have the exact same action, use the Force to play an event. So no buff there. But 1-cost discounts are good, and we've talked about how resource cheating in this game is powerful. This one being more restrictive than some other good ones, like both Hans, for instance, have much less restrictive abilities. But where this will shine the most is with cheaper events. The cheaper the event, the more bang for your buck you get for this. For instance, a 1-cost event, you're getting 100% discount. What's a really good 1-cost event to do this with? Xian Flurry, which is already in yellow. You can now ambush any Force unit on rate. You don't have to pay that extra 1. And obviously this goes hand in hand with the new Darth Vader unit, who's absolutely crazy when you ambush him. So you can do something like Xian Flurry plus Vader. It's really nice. Some other decent yellow events that you can get access to, things like No Good To Me Dead costing 1 is pretty nice. Shoot First, or the Force version of Shoot Force, costing 0 can be nice. Now there are 2 of them. Getting a discount means you can actually play a 6-drop on turn 2. You can go turn 1 Force unit, attack with it, get the token, then now there are 2 of them, a 6-drop Force unit like Darth Vader. Or later in the curve, you just get an extra resource cheat on that. Now there are 2 of them. Same with like Sneak Attack. All decent stuff. Once you get into the more like controlling events, things like Power of the Dark Side, Velvet Dragon, etc., you get decent utility out of them. Only if you're able to create turns where you can use 2 cards in 1 turn, right? That discount doesn't matter if you're still burning a resource and not able to use your full resource pool. So it's going to take a lot to kind of maneuver this leader and figure out the proper costs of all the events you're going to run, while also getting all the proper Force units into this deck so that you can continuously use the ability. And that's going to be the bigger challenge, because again, like yellow has basically no support for the Force mechanic. I think you're mostly going to end up tied into blue, maybe red, because that's where you get a few more Force units. But the leader is definitely interesting and has some cool gimmicks, and excited to at least try it out. As for the heroic tier maybes, we've got Qui-Gon Jinn, and this ability can really go off. The problem is it can also be completely bricked by your opponent's interaction. So high ceiling, low floor kind of ability. I think if you get into a late game scenario with this leader, he might be the grindiest, most value-based ability we've seen, because you're just going to be able to keep looping your home ones, for instance, or your Kelleran Becks. You're going to play a home one, bounce it, play a Kelleran Beck, and now that home one is back in your hand. You're getting all these one-played effects. You can really drain your opponent's hand with things like Ahsoka bouncing it. You can redo things with ambush, right? An ambush unit comes in, attacks, where ambush in particular works really well with the force mechanic, because you immediately get the force token, and then you bounce that ambush unit, you lose your force token, but you play a new ambush unit, and bam, you get that token back, and you get to like reuse these one-played effects. Really sweet stuff. The problem is the moment they kind of brick your board, even for a moment, your ability just kind of falls apart completely. It becomes a bit tougher to rebuild. You're very, very, very committed to this force mechanic, and if you lose the force token momentarily, your ability just bricks, and now your units are just sitting ducks. And his leader deploy, once again, similar to Barriss, 4/7 on deploy, not great, and he himself, his ability's a little better when he's out, because he no longer needs to use the force token, which is nice. So on his flip turn, you can get like a double trigger with him, which is nice. Use his ability, flip him, use his ability again. You can kind of chain your units out. You just have to play a bunch of powerful when played effects, which is no shortage in heroic, especially in heroic green, which is where I think like yellow green value town sort of mid-rangey deck, that's where like I think Qui-Gon will thrive. You do get a decent amount of force support in heroic colors, much better than you do in villain colors. So this one looks pretty fun. Like, the ability itself is kind of broken. Like, we always like to find broken interactions, and being able to just play units for free, churn them out, get value out of these repeated when played effects is really nice. It just might end up being a little too clunky, especially with how this game works with the action sequencing, where you can only do one action at a time, then your opponent can interact, and it gives them time to kind of mess with all the synergy you're trying to establish. And the last one I've put on tier maybe is Avar Kriss, and I don't love this leader, but I think she does something really unique, and it's not the leader deploy. Actually, I know a lot is made out of this leader like coming out being enormous, kind of carrying you to victory, but I think the powerful part about this leader is her leader side ability, where she can just get the force without having to do anything, right? You don't have to play a bunch of weak force units, you don't have to attack with any of them, you don't have to play these 25 health bases, you just get to do it every turn, which is great. You still probably need to play the force base, because if you ever want to deploy this leader earlier than like 8, you're going to need to be able to get the force multiple times in one turn. But I don't think you should be striving to get this leader out earlier than 7 for the most part. I think 7 is kind of where I'd expect a well-designed deck should be able to deploy her decently consistently. But the power stuff here is just that you don't get bricked by your opponent's interaction. You get to keep this force mechanic on at all times. So the card Jedi Counselor, for instance, is the first card that I'd look at with Avar Kriss. You just get to use that on turn 2. As long as your opponent doesn't instantly kill your 1/4, you can play a 5-drop. That's great. But all these other things, right? If you're looking at red, for instance, Ki-Adi-Mundi, right? There's no way they can turn off that draw 2. You just get to do force, play them, draw 2 cards. Mace Windu, you get to play them, deal 4. There's nowhere in this sequencing where your opponent can say, no, you don't get the force. And that's pretty powerful, because all those force payoffs are quite good. The downside being on this leader is that it just simply is a very late deploy. And it's also a deploy that does not help you against aggression. Not nearly as much as even like Kylo does, who's a sentinel and immediately gets to maybe do something. This is similar to the Rey leader that I put in tier no, right? It flips and does absolutely nothing. It's just a big beat stick. which is nice when you're trying to close out games, but it's not nice when your opponent is killing you. And that's going to be this tension for Avar throughout, I think, her lifespan, is that can you essentially beat aggro decks without a leader, which is difficult, right? And her ability certainly helps in a lot of ways because you don't end up bricked on any of your force interactions. So a lot of these force interactions that you're going to rely on are always on. And there's things in blue too. There's the healing unit in Itinerant Warrior or Internet Warrior, however you like to refer to it. That's nice. You don't have to attack with anything. You just get to heal 3 regardless because of her ability. And you can get multiple triggers of force in one turn quite easily with Avar Kriss. So if you want to play cheap events like Sorceress Blast in red, you can do that while also still getting that force back and then playing a unit that might use it, which is nice. The most broken thing, I mentioned it already, is the Jedi Consular. Just being able to have that online on turn 2 with no hoops to jump through is really nice. It's not so easy to kill 1/4s on turn 2 for a lot of decks, which means at least one shot of that ability, and sometimes that can be enough to really get your defenses up. So Avar's a nice build around. A little concerned that the leader itself will fall short just because of how little it offers in terms of stability late in the game, and how easily it's countered by similar things that Kylo is. Removal, right? Removal for your giant leader is difficult sometimes to overcome, but cool nonetheless. All right, so let's get into the next tier. This is tier probably, and we've only got 2 leaders on this one, and they are both Force-centric leaders, one heroic, one villain. And the main reason they're here up in tier probably is because I think their power floor is quite high. There's kind of no way these leaders won't be at the very least decent. They both have very solid leader abilities that don't cost resources. I mean, they cost a resource, the force token, but don't cost actual resources. And they both have solid deploys, 5 cost, decent stats, right? So their floors are high. So let's see what we can do with them. Let's start with Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, first things first, we're going to have a conversation here about heroic force, and then when I preview Talzin, villain force. But with heroic force, your force curve is quite sturdy in this game. With the release of this set, which gave heroic unit leaders or heroic force synergies a lot of units, think Adi Gallia, Yaddle, Gungi. In yellow, there's the 2/3, the Youngling Padawan. Those are all solid cards that turn on your force synergies, turn on your force token acquisition. You already had a decent amount in heroic coming into this set in the 3 and 4 cost slots, so you're just more solid in your curve. And Obi-Wan is going to reward you just for having these units out. You get a free experience token to throw around whenever you attack with these units, so this is a cleaner use of that, a cleaner way to enable that experience than something like Rey that requires a 1 cost investment. As long as you build your curve properly for Obi-Wan, you shouldn't have too much of a difficulty turning on this ability, and early experience tokens can really help a lot with early combat math. So for instance, in yellow, you can start with this Youngling Padawan, who's a 2/3. He immediately gives you the token, so you actually kind of have a pseudo turn 1 3/4. Of course, it gives up initiative almost every time, but still nice to start that way. And very unlikely he can be removed immediately, which means he can attack, get you that token, and you can keep going. It's works well with Venestra, which can then come in ready because of that force token and immediately attack, get back that token. So that's a nice little sequence that yellow can have with Obi-Wan. You of course get Gungi, who's a giant 2/5 that works with this ability. And then you also have things like General's Blade. A lot of these units are Jedis, and you're in that green color. Obi-Wan himself is a Jedi, so he works well with that blade. In other colors like blue, you just have a never-ending stream of decent force units. You can play a grindy, mid-rangey green-blue heroic deck, similar to ones we've seen with like Ray or Luke or whatever it may be, your top end has that home one stuff, but it's also now got the addition of Keller and Beck and Yoda all the way up that top end. So very powerful in that green shell to grind. And even red has access to a decent amount of force units and the force payoffs like Ki-Adi-Mundi and Mace. Now, when you're in red, you need a reason to be playing Obi-Wan instead of something like Han 2, who can play these heroic units, heroic force payoffs a turn earlier, which might be better. So maybe if red defers to that, then we work on Obi-Wan with yellow or blue, but he certainly can still be run with red, and there's just no shortage of ways to enable this leader. Now, the power ceiling might not be crazy, like he's still like just an experienced thrower around her, right? There's nothing like late game powerful about this ability. It's all about that early game math, getting control of the board, getting that early leader flip so that you can keep pressing your advantage. And then if you're in an aggro version of Obi-Wan, you're trying to close through the 6-7 turns. If you're in the grindier versions, then that leader becomes less important, but he maybe helps you get to that later game because of his early game power. Very high floor though. A lot of different ways to kind of build it, although they're all kind of inbred around this one mechanic. You need a bunch of force units, so whichever color you pick, you go search by force and you add most of the good force units, and then you get to throw in a few payoffs from the force mechanic. Some of them are events, which is nice. And then, of course, your top end at that point might not matter as much for the force mechanic once you're out of that early stage, once you aren't trying to just maximize this ability. It's nice to have this ability as a throwback, as a fallback plan, so that even when you don't have your force payoffs in your hand, you have something to do with that force token. So you can throw that experience, get that token back with your unit attacks, and then if you draw into a force payoff, you still have ways to do that, right? So you can use the force multiple times with a leader like Obi-Wan, which is really nice. And the units are pretty sticky, so you should be able to keep getting that token over and over again. So overall, a solid leader. Do I think he'll necessarily crush the meta? Not really, because it still plays in like a pretty fair sphere of the game. It might struggle a little bit with control decks. It might be a little slow against other aggro decks, but I think there's definitely like a mid-range shell that Obi-Wan can operate in that will be quite powerful. Now, let's talk about the villain best force leader, and that's Mother Talzin. We'll start with the meta discussion about force in villain that I've been alluding to this whole time, and I'm a bit disappointed in general about the about what villain was given in terms of force in this set. Coming into this set, villain force was awful, like straight up awful. You could not find a villain force deck to play force throw and force lightning and whatever it may be. The units were all bad. Like, they have no turn 1 force units. I mean, neither did heroic really, but their turn 2 force unit was like Fifth Brother, who's not a good card. The 4 drops, not that exciting, and most importantly, the leaders themselves that had force trait weren't particularly powerful. Now, Talzin certainly fixes that element of this. She is Quinlan-esque in her deploy, right? Is a 5 flip 3/7, a very good stat line with the force trait, a very good ability on attack to shrink something. That is a very powerful on attack. Her ability on the leader side, also quite solid, -1/-1. It's maybe not as powerful as using that force token for some other payoffs, but the key here, similar to Obi-Wan, is you can do it twice, right? You can use this ability, get the force back, and then use a payoff. So you get to double dip in that force interaction. So she's the complete package when it comes to that. But once again, villains were just not given nearly as much help in terms of enablers that Heroic has. So they were given Karis, which is a very good turn 1 force unit, the 2/4. Outside of that, it's a lot of chaff, to be honest. Like Kylo, 2/3, overwhelmed with the upgrade thing. He's whatever. Like, you probably need to play him, but he's whatever. The the red version of Youngling Padawan, the Acolyte, that unit doesn't even have the Force trait, unfortunately. Now, I know it gives you the token when it dies or on attack, but not having the Force trait certainly turns off some of the synergies you would have liked. I don't know why it doesn't have the Force trait. The Youngling Padawan has the Force trait. It seems unnecessary to make that card weaker for no reason. Past that, the best Force enablers are things like Secretive Sage, even Marin as a 3-drop, or Jedi in Hiding as a 3-drop, but these are all neutral aspect cards. You get one villain locked one in red, which is Grand Inquisitor, and one in yellow, which is Shin Hati, but outside of that, most of the decent, I say decent because they're not as good as the heroic versions, are just neutral aspect Force units. And heroic, I named a bunch of them, and there's even more, certainly from the earlier sets, right? All those 2/4s and 2/5s that heroic got. And then they get Ezra, and they had previous Ezra, and they get Venestra, and they have so many, like, there's Yoda, there's Kanan, there's whatever, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Mace Windu, like all these Force units all over the place, and Villain is really stuck trying to fill out a Force curve, and it's kind of annoying, frankly. The payoffs that you get for this Force token, there's two very good ones. There's the Assassin that gives -3/-3, and there's Dooku or Tyrannus, the 4/3 Ambusher. Very good cards. Kind of weird to me that they're both 4 cost because they both share that same payoff area. Not to mention they also conflict with the Chirrut Force payoff card. He's another 4 cost. They conflict with Shatterpoint, the removal that is a Force payoff. So like every good Force token payoff in this deck is essentially a 4 cost card, and that's a little awkward. And yeah, like the units themselves that you have to play in the 2 and 3 drop slot, which are your bread and butter. For a Force deck to operate, you need your curve to be entirely Force for the most part in those 2 and 3 drop slots, because you need to be able to use her ability consistently to get board advantage. You need to maintain tempo. You can't get into scenarios where you lose that Force token, because then those 4 drop payoffs we talked about disappear entirely, and you're just playing lower rate units than other decks need to play. Now, Talzin does a ton of heavy lifting on her own, that even with the weaker Force units than the heroic decks, she can still kind of operate as a solid deck, because she has a very powerful ability and a very powerful deploy. She turns on the non-Force token payoffs, specifically things like Force Throw and Force Lightning. If you're going to play a red version, I can see working with a yellow version as well with Talzin, although you lose a decent amount of Force enablers in that sort of deck. You do get access to something like Xia Flurry that works really well with a lot of the Force units, including Darth Vader that you can start running at the 6 cost slot. You also get a bunch of pumps like Blaster and Surprise Strike, so you might work into a more tempo aggro version, whereas the red, I think, kind of builds itself a little more naturally with her, because Force Throw is an incredibly powerful card. Force Lightning in this deck works. It's not, I don't think Force Lightning is like an incredible card, but it's a solid removal card to have access to kind of throughout your curve. And you do have a larger abundance of Force units to play in the red version. So you also can play things like lightsabers. Now there's constructed lightsaber that was given to neutral. So even in a non-red version, you can play it. Fallen lightsaber is obviously very good with her too. So there's a lot to like about this leader, and a lot of the, as I said, heavy lifting is being done by the leader card itself. I just really wish that like Villain Force was just given, it doesn't even have to be as much support as heroic. It's just really problematic that the early units are just so weak for the most part, that I find that there's going to be a situation, or a potentially likely situation, that even though this leader is very, very good, like simply is, it's probably the best leader on rate in this entire set, that the support surrounding her isn't good enough, and you resort to having to play weak units just to keep your curve alive. And you know, the games where you don't go turn 1 Karis and you instead have to play like Kylo, and you don't have initiative or something, or you have to play like the 2/2 that draws a card when it dies, or some other random force unit, or like on turn 2 where you don't draw Grand Inquisitor and now maybe you're stuck playing, I don't know, Marin, who's fine, not great, or Jedi in Hiding or in yellow. Of course, if you don't draw Shin Hati, then like your 3-drop slot is basically barren when it comes to force. It's just tricky. It just becomes trickier to build a solid deck, and you also just don't have access to the heroic payoffs for force. You have the 4-drops that I mentioned, but like look at everything that Hero has. Ki-Adi-Mundi and Mace. You got Yoda. You get Itinerant Warrior. You get, I mean, there's more that I'm having a hard time even like remembering, but those cards, there's so much more to do, and they're spread throughout a curve. They include a top end, which Mother Talzin, there's no like big force payoff. There's Darth Sidious. I don't think that card is very good. And overall, you're just kind of resorted to playing this much more low to the ground than a hero version of force can do. But still, I think this leader is quite powerful, and she reminds me a lot of Quinlan, like I mentioned. I think you operate in that similar sphere of like a disruptive, aggressive deck that has just a very good leader deploy that can do a lot of heavy lifting. I wish Villain also had some more smuggle options, because hero smuggle options are so much better, that they enable a much more tempo oriented deck, because you do just kind of rely on the top of your deck when you're playing a Villain tempo deck. You don't have that insulation in your resource row in terms of good smuggle options. But I think both these leaders, their floors are very high. Potentially their ceilings can improve with continued support with force units. I don't expect us to be getting more force token payoffs in later sets. I mean, it's possible we will, but so far in the game development, we have not seen set locked mechanics transition between sets. So we're probably stuck with the payoffs, and like in Hero, that's probably okay. In Villain, we don't have that many good ones, so it's a little unfortunate, but Villain could really use some good 2 and 3 drop force units so that they don't have to play as much chaff as they do. And Heroic, you know, they're solid there and get much more access to a solid curve. All right, for those of you who've been counting, tier yes. None make it this time. You know, none of these leaders really spoke to me the way that some others have in the past. This is tier yes is not always reserved to just like the best of the best. It's just also something that I think is just like highly rewarding to build around, and I'm not seeing that in this set. Obi and Talzin, you could have said they deserve to be here, but I think even though their floors are quite high, their ceilings might not reach what I would want in a tier yes, and certainly I don't find them as interesting as some other tier yes leaders I've had here in the past. So for this set, we don't get one here, but hopefully we do in the future. And with that, I'm going to wrap this up. Let me know what you think of the leaders in Legends of the Force. There's a lot of cool ones, a lot that I think are kind of lacking in power level, but so be it. So far to date, we have not seen that many leaders in most sets become meta dominant. It's about 2 per set, sometimes 3. There's one set, I think the Shadows had about 5 that became dominant, and I would not expect that to happen here at all, but it's normal, right? The cream rises, and that's about it. Like, you're not going to see most of these leaders in top tier tournaments. It's just simply going to be true always, and that's fine. That's how it's meant to be, so to speak. But let me know what you think, and until next time, take care.